Storytelling is an area of photography that isn't really spoken about very often, but it is a genuinely important thing when it comes to improving your photography or yourself as a photographer. Now, storytelling is defined as the interactive art of using words or actions to reveal the elements and images of a story while encouraging imagination. When we think about story, we often think about a beginning, middle and end, and how you can tell a narrative within that. But when it comes to photography, it's obviously a little bit different, and you might think to yourself, how is it even relevant when photography is just one single still image? But in short, story can just be a way of adding more intrigue or getting the viewer to ask questions about your images. In this photo, for example, that I took in Wales just a few weeks ago, on the surface it is just a very simple landscape photo. We have the headland here with a little lighthouse on the top, and that is pretty much sat on the right hand rule of thirds line and also on the top rule of thirds line. But then as well as that, we've got the mountains in the distance that are nice and hazy. That adds in a little bit of depth. But then we've got all of this space here that just helps the image to breathe a little bit. But then if you look closely, we also have this little man just here bobbing around in the water, and that for me is what adds story and intrigue into the image. So if I was to get rid of that man, let's just generative fill him. In fact, we don't need generative fill, we'll just mask him out very roughly, very quickly. If we were to get rid of him, the image doesn't have the same impact. If we add him back in, all of a sudden he fills that space, but it is small enough to show the scale of the place, but you're also asking questions about it. You're like, why is he there? What's he doing? What's he thinking about? Where's he going? Is he going to swim out into the open here? Is he just sat there in the sea bobbing around? What's he thinking about? All of these different things are questions that him being there make you ask about that image. But if we were to get rid of him, it's a really nice photo, but there's less of a story to it for me. And that's the thing that I like about photography. I love landscape photography, but I love mixing it in with human elements like that, and that for me is a really nice way of doing it. You still need to be careful about your composition. So if you look carefully, yes, it's not perfect, but if you were to add a rule of thirds line in down the lighthouse, that person is almost on the other rule of thirds line. So I'm trying to think about things carefully like that. Maybe you could say that I could crop out this little rock on the left, and then they are directly on the rule of thirds line, but that to me, it looks a little bit unbalanced. So I decided to keep that rock on the left in. I just love the space that creates, and it shows that he's in a little bay. It's making you ask a few questions about it. It adds intrigue. But I think for me, when I started to think about things like that in my images, that is when I started to notice a big difference in my photography. And I have here two other very similar images of the same headland, but they all tell their own stories. So this one, for example, it's a little bit more cropped in. I shot this at 100mm, I think. Yeah. 60mm. The other one was shot at 50mm, but I'm also a little bit lower down on the beach itself. And again, it is just a very simple landscape image of the headland and the lighthouse with the mountains behind. I spotted this little person just wandering around on the headland, and I decided to include them because that adds a story to the image. And this photo is the exact same. It's the same headland, but we've got two people over here, and we've got two people that were just pulling up onto the beach from a boat that is parked over on the left here. And you can see them. You don't know if they're heading out into sea. You don't know if they're just getting back. These two people, one with their hands on the hips, look as if they're watching these two on the little dinghy, raft, boat, whatever you want to call it. So we've got three very different images of the same headland that all tell different stories within them. And that's one thing that I like to do when I'm out doing photography, is just to focus on one specific thing and see how many different images and stories you can tell from that place. It doesn't always have to be the most obvious things that tell a story in your images either. It could, for example, be the weather conditions, and this is a perfect example of that, because this place is one of the eeriest and sketchiest places I've ever been to in my life. But the weather conditions made it even more bleak, and you can see that with how hazy and cloudy it is up here. And we've got this abandoned old building with all these old bits of machinery lying around, and that in itself tells a story, because you're like, where is that? That does look bleak. What is this old barrel that's lying around, this wheel thing? How did they get up there? Who worked up there? Did anyone live up there? These are all questions that image makes you ask. You can even see little bits of old pipes lying around in the ground here. There's things hammered into the ground. You can see that it's all overgrown and covered in weeds. So you're like, how long has that been abandoned? So that is another way of trying to tell a story in the least obvious ways. And this is another example of trying to do the same. It's an old quarry in Wales. We've got all this old abandoned buildings on the left. We've got this piece of machinery dangling down into the quarry down here. There's a big drop off the edge. We've got all this old metal work lying around on the floor. It's all overgrown. That in itself tells a story. How long has it been abandoned? What was it like there when people were working up there? And then with this one, this tells stories in a different way, because you can almost imagine going through the decades in this image, because this is in one of those old abandoned buildings that is in this image. However, you can imagine all of the old quarry workers sat around this old fireplace trying to keep warm at the top of the mountains in the middle of the winter, maybe sat on this old bench, just huddling up trying to keep warm. But then if you look carefully in the window, these are old shoes from the quarry workers that used to work there before it was abandoned. They're literally just sat there decaying and have been for years and years and years. But on the walls around it, there's all this rubbish, obviously things that have fallen down from the wall, but there's cans and bottles of water and all of this modern day graffiti just on the walls. So this image tells stories in a different way, and it allows you to use your imagination as to what has gone on in that room over the years, and you can imagine it all taking place with the amount of people that have been in that space. That for me is what makes an image more interesting, and it's something that I'm always trying to think about when I'm out doing photography, because I think it's a hugely important area of photography that doesn't necessarily get spoken about enough, because we're all focused on what gear to use, what settings we need to use, and all the technical aspects of photography that are important. And talking about gear is fun, buying new gear is fun, but actually learning how to craft and tell stories in your images can be equally as fun, and probably arguably more important. But the good thing about practicing storytelling and things like that to improve your photography in other ways is that it is entirely free. You don't need any fancy equipment to go and do it. You don't need a brand new camera. It's something that you can practice at any point, even if you just go out and take photos with your phone. And you don't need to worry about things like lighting or weather conditions either. And granted, all of these different things are going to make a huge difference into how your images look, because they do make a difference. Gear makes a difference. Lighting makes a huge difference. My point is that if there are no nice conditions, there's no nice light, it's pretty grey and flat and boring, you can still go out and try and find stories and compositions that help tell a story. You don't always need to be out in perfect photography conditions to practice getting better at your craft. It's nice when that does happen, because your images will naturally improve, but if you're always waiting around for those days, that is going to prolong your improvement as a photographer, especially if you live here in England. Never stops raining in England. So that's it for this video. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. If you are interested, All of the presets that I've used to edit my photos in this video are available on my website for download, so go and check them out if you want to have a look. It is massively appreciated if you do. Let me know your thoughts on storytelling in photography. Is it an area that you are looking to improve on? And yeah, I'll see you in the next video. Oh, it's so cold. It's not even October and I'm on the verge of putting the heating on. But I'm going to stick it out. Oh, where's the summer? We didn't have a summer. Can we have a summer? I'm not ready for the cold weather.